Hey guys, welcome back to our last week of Apologetics series. High five for making it this far. We are excited to be back here with you. You'll remember the word apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to give a defense. And in this case, we're talking about a defense of the Christian faith. How can you communicate questions and thoughts that you have with your friends who may be asking you questions about that, whether they're Christians or not? I want to remind you of 5 things that we've talked about over the last few weeks. Flashback number 1, everyone has a worldview, a lens through which they see the world and answer life's biggest questions, including you. Asking good questions like, what do you mean, allows you to better understand someone's worldview. And we've practiced that a little bit in small groups. Our goal in these conversations with flashback number 2 is always to point people to the gospel, which is the good news that Jesus has given us forgiveness in this life and the promise of eternal life to come. Flashback number 3, when it comes to defending the existence of God, the easiest place to start is that we have yet to see something come from nothing. Instead, we look at the order in our world and see the marks of a designer. Flashback number 4, we need to be ready to answer why we personally follow Jesus. Not why our parents do, not why we were brought up in the faith, why we personally follow Jesus. In a simple sentence like, I believe Jesus died for my sin and rose from the dead. That's it. And then we follow that with proofs for the resurrection. If you're not sure about all of those, check last week's video and you'll have some great thoughts. Flashback number 5, while there are many archaeological finds you should know about, see last week's evidence sheet, regarding the Old Testament, the number 1 reason we validate, reference, trust the Old Testament is Jesus did. And that takes us to our final objections to the Christian faith tonight.
Are there any justifiable reasons why God would allow for there to be suffering and evil in this world?
Sure, absolutely. Even if we don't know what those things are. I think we have to step back from this and realize there's a chasm of knowledge between an infinite God and finite human beings. And a great analogy is the chasm of knowledge between a parent and a child, right? I mean, when my kids are babies, I take them to the doctor to permit that doctor, to allow that doctor to stick them with needles, right, to cause them pain. And they have no clue why I'm doing this. They have no understanding of why I'm doing this. But I have, as a dad, morally sufficient reasons to take them to the doctor to cause them pain or to allow this pain into their life, ultimately for some greater good. Even when my kids are older, when my 4-year-old still has to go get her shots, and I reason with her, Dad, why are you doing this to me? Is what she says. Why are you taking me to the doctors? Well, honey, I have morally sufficient reasons to do it. I don't put it in that language, but essentially that's what I'm trying to say to her. Well, because the shot's going to help you, protect you from diseases or things like that. Well, even with my 4-year-old, even when I give her the explanation, what does she say to me? She doesn't say, "Oh, okay, Dad, I'll go get the shot then." She looks at me and goes, "No, I still don't want to go," because there's this gulf of understanding. And from my perspective as an adult, someone who has a lot more knowledge, I see the good reasons why I would allow this kind of pain and suffering into her life, because I have morally sufficient reasons. In the same way, if there's a gulf between a 4-year-old and a parent, just think about the gulf of understanding and knowledge between God and human beings. And so this is where we also have to trust. We have to trust in the character of God, that He has good reasons to allow and to permit suffering and evil in our lives.
All right, what a wonderful video that was to kind of give us a good illustration for how we interact with God and how this all works. There's a lot of things that happen in our world that we don't understand, and God has told us that His ways are higher than our ways, and His knowledge is higher than our knowledge. And so like the relationship between a parent and a child, there's a lot of things that we don't understand. And so that's of great comfort to us as Christians. However, on the problem of evil and suffering, that might not be a great answer to our non-Christian friends or people who have questions that don't come from our same worldview. And so we're going to talk about 2 other arguments that we have and the basic approach of what we're up to here with the problem of evil, and then we'll see what the Bible has to say. And so first off, the approach that we have here is that we want to show that our understanding of evil is actually evidence that God exists and that good exists. And then the next step would be to show them that our God can be good and powerful and loving, like we know he is, and still allow evil to occur for certain purposes. And so first we talk about the reality of evil. Some people say that how can evil exist and an all-powerful God exist? One of the arguments that we might pose is that the reality of evil actually presupposes that we understand what is good and what is evil. It presupposes a moral standard. And we believe that that standard is set in place by our God. And so if there's no God, then there's no moral standard or objective of good and evil. So therefore, the reality of evil presupposes a God.
This is the problem of evil. It comes up all the time, okay? And it catches Christians flat-footed. It's a great spot for your first question. People say, what about all the evil in the world? I say, what about it? Well, doesn't that create a problem for you? Well, what exactly is the problem? You see how what I'm doing is I'm just parrying for a moment and forcing them to be more clear about their own objection. Now, you might be thinking, well, I can ask those two questions. I don't know where to go from there, and there is more detail there. But I'll tell you, when I get into it a little bit, there's a problem with the problem of evil as an objection against Christianity. Because at some point, I'm going to ask, what do you mean by evil? And I know what they're going to say. They're going to talk about murders and rapes and tortures and that kind of stuff. And then I say, wait a minute, you just gave me examples of evil. You didn't tell me what you meant by evil. Why would you give those things as examples of evil and not something like kindness or mercy as examples of evil? So what my questions are meant to do at this point, just the first question, is to get to the core of what they mean by evil. And somewhere down the line, they're going to say, well, it's because things aren't the way they're supposed to be. Now, it might be occurring to you that if there is a way that they are supposed to be, there's got to be a supposer for that, which is starting to lean towards the existence of God on this issue. I don't have time to develop this anymore, but what I want you to see is even on a tough issue like the problem of evil, you can start leading with those first information gathering questions. What do you mean by that, or some variation? And it can really give you an advantage.
And then the other question would be that I see so much suffering in the world. There's so much sickness and financial ruin, and how can a good, loving God allow that to happen? The argument that we would have here is that in order for suffering to matter, the suffering of humans to matter, we would have to say that humans matter. And so with our understanding and our worldview of who God is and creation, and he gave us life and told us that it was good and that humans have meaning. If humans don't have meaning, what is the purpose of their suffering? Does it even matter? And so in order to say that suffering is wrong, you have to concede that humans matter and that our life matters. And so from our worldview, we can back that up by saying that it is God who's given us purpose and meaning. And we know that suffering is not a good thing, but we say it's not a good thing because God gave us life and he made it good. Okay. Now in your small groups, what we want to do is have you go through Scripture. The Bible is not silent on this by any means. All the way from Genesis into Revelation, there is evidence and defenses for why God allows evil in certain situations. You can see the list here. In your small groups, we want you to go through that list and really identify where here is God talking about the existence of evil or the existence of good, conversely, and how that applies. What is the utility of it? One good example that you might come across in these verses is the example of Joseph. His brothers came to him and he confronted them and he said, what you did to me, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. We see there at the end of the story the utility of the evil that occurred and how God turned it around and served his own purposes through it. And so it's something that we'd really like you guys to do in your small groups. Okay, so this brings us to the end of our apologetics series. This was a huge blessing to me, and I know it was to Maria as well, that we could dive into these topics and kind of help walk through these with you. I know that there's probably still a ton of questions that you guys have. And so we are always here to talk about those and to answer any more questions that you have and just work through this stuff with you. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me or to Maria. If she'll include the my contact information, so you guys have that as well. But we're excited for you guys to gather for one last time on this apologetics series. We're excited to see what comes back on the games. It sounds like you guys are going to be doing a spin-off of MTV Cribs. You might not know what that is, but it'll be fun. I'm sure of it. And we're excited to see what comes back on that. We miss you guys. We hope that you had a great Easter weekend. And we look forward to the next time we can all gather together.